Okay, people, welcome back to the British Israelites, Chapter 1. I was just reading it there for about half an hour before a big blue bottle flew into my living room and it was buzzing around my head, and it just totally distracted me and I had to end the video like, oh, it's so disappointing. But I got it. I got the thing. Shovel right out. It was massive. It was noisy. Bzzz. Oh, Jesus, man. So, I need to start this chapter again. And I was saying to a subscriber, I think it was Sophie, that I'm going to make a blooper video on my readings. All the readings I've started and had to end because I've mucked up my words or something's distracted me, I've been interrupted. I might make a blooper video in my readings because I've got lots of failed chapters. Anyway, without further ado, the British Israelites, Chapter 1, Historical Evidence. Considerable interest has of late years been taken by numbers of Englishmen in the facts brought forward from time to time, proving that they are no other than the 10 tribes of Israel who, under Pekah and Hosea, were carried away captives by the Assyrians under Tiglath-Pileser and Shalmaneser about 740 to 678 years BC. Having very carefully studied the arguments brought forward in support of this identification, as well as the objections raised against it by opponents, we now come forward as exponents of the cause, the importance of the subject being our only apology. Why should so small a country as Britain possess such great influence over the whole world as she does, and be successful in all her wars, notwithstanding that she continually makes the most palpable blunders? We have many faults, socially, nationally, and individually, to confess and bemoan, yet, for all that, it will be admitted that we are a great nation. What is the secret of Britain's greatness? If it is proved that the British are Israelites, the whole history of England will be understood from a right point of view, and that is, that God's dealings with her, being Israel, show forth that he is true, faithful, and covenant-keeping. This is the true secret of England's greatness, and not any inherent goodness that rests in her or her people. Deuteronomy 4 and 7. The Kimrai. In the Western Asiatic inscriptions of the British Museum, Volume 3, page 10, occurs the following copy of a fragmentary inscription of Tiglath-Pileser II, who reigned in Assyria 740 BC. The lands of Beth Cumri, Samaria, the population, the goods of its people, I sent to Assyria. Their king, Pekah, had been slain. I appointed Hosea over their kingdom. There fell into my hands altogether, between the commencement of my reign and my 5th year, 42 countries with their kings from beyond the river Zab, plain, forest and mountain to beyond the river Euphrates, the country of the Katai, Hittites, and the upper oceans of the setting sun, the Mediterranean. I brought them under one government, I placed them under the Magian religion, and I imposed on them tribute and offerings. Tiglath-Pileser I, translated by Sir H. Rawlinson, Stones Crying Out. In the days of Pekah, king of Israel, came Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria, and took Ijon, and carried them captive to Assyria. Chronicles, verse 26. And the God of Israel stirred up the spirit of Pul, king of Assyria, and the spirit of Tilgath-Pilneser, king of Assyria, and they carried them away. Even the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh brought them unto Hala and Habor and Hara, and to the river Gozan unto this day. Kings 22. In the 9th year of Hoshea, the king of Assyria took Samaria, and carried Israel away into Assyria, and placed them in Hala and in Habor by the river of Gozan, and the cities of Medes. For the children of Israel walked in all the sins of Jeroboam, which he did. They separated not from them until the Lord removed Israel, as he had said by all his servants the prophets. So was Israel carried away out of their own land to Assyria unto this day. The cuneiform inscriptions of King Sargon describe the above captivity thus: by the help of the sun I captured the city of Samaria, Qumro, and carried into captivity 27,280 of its inhabitants. Notice the Israelites are called Beth Cumri and Qumro, On the Nimrod obelisk in the British Museum, another inscription deciphered by Reverend Dr. Hinks of Belfast states that Jehu, son of Omri, Yahu Abel Cumri, paid tribute to Shalmaneser II, king of Assyria, 858-823 BC. Jehu was really the son of Jehoshaphat, 2 Kings 2, but he was one of the house of Omri who built Samaria, Cumro, Kings. The Assyrians, as Rawlinson informs us, taking him from the legitimate successor to the throne, named him Cumri after his ancestor Omri. The Assyrian K or K having the same phonetic value as the initial letter of Omri omitted in our English Bibles. The same writer says that a people known to their neighbours as Kimrai, Gimri, or probably Gomerim, attained to considerable power in Western Asia and Eastern Europe within the period indicated by the date 800 to 600 BC, is a fact which can scarcely be said to admit of a doubt. Herodotus, Book 4, Essay 1. Now the Cumri, called sometimes Gimri, the tribes were known by the Greeks as the Kimmeroi, and the Cimbri by the Romans about 650 to 630 BC in the east of Europe. The Crimea is believed to have been called after them, and many ancient Israelitish tombstones have been found there. They, the Cimbri, have been traced to Cumberland in Britain and to Cambria in Wales, and are spoken of as the Cymri. A Russian fortress called Gyumri still exists on the banks of Araxes, at the very place where the Israelites were taken after their captivity. Rawlinson says the Cimmerians, when the Scythians fell upon them from the east, must have gradually retreated westwards. If, then, we are to find the Cimmerians driven westwards 650 to 600 BC among the known nations of Central or Western Europe, we must look for them among the Celts. Now the Celts had an unvarying tradition that they came from the east, and it is a fact concerning which there can be no question that one of the main divisions of Celtic peoples has always borne the name of Cymri as its special national designation. The identity of the Cymri of Wales with the Cymri of the Romans seems worthy of being accepted as a historical fact upon the grounds stated by Niebuhr and Arnold. Rawlinson's Herodotus, Appendix Book 4, Essay 1, 3. Sharon Turner also states that at some period after the Cimmerians reached the shores of the German Ocean, a portion of them passed the sea and settled themselves in Britain. Anglo-Saxon History, page 5. The Sakai, Scythians, Anglo-Saxons. Sir Henry Rawlinson says the ethnic name of the Gimri occurs in the cuneiform records as a Semitic equivalent of the Aryan name Sakai or Sakai, Saka or Sakai. Again, the Sakoi Scythians were termed the Gimri by the Semitic neighbours. It is very remarkable that in the Achaemenian inscriptions, the Sakan or Scythian population, which was widely spread over the Persian Empire, receives in the Babylonian transcripts the name Gimri, which looks as if this were the Semitic equivalent for the Aryan name of Saka or Scyths. Perhaps both names originally meant nomads or wanderers, and only came in course of time to be used as ethnic appellatives. Herod, Essay 1. The Sakai Scythians. The ethnic name of Gimri, the equivalent of the Cymri according to Professor Rawlinson, first occurs in the cuneiform records of the time of Darius Hystaspes as Semitic equivalent of the Aryan name of Saka. The Babylonian title of Gimri, as applied to the Sakai, is not a vernacular but a foreign title, and that it may simply mean the tribes, generally corresponding thus to the Hebrew, this Hebrew sign here. Let's have a wee search, in fact. You can find this. We'll do a little search, people. See what this Hebrew symbol is, if it pastes. So when I copy and paste that Hebrew symbol in the book, it comes up as D and U, which I don't think is correct. Anyway, back to the book. The Sakai or Scythians, who were termed Gimri by the Semitic neighbours, first appear in the cuneiform inscriptions as a substantive people under Esarhaddon about BC 684, Rawlinson's Herodotus, Appendix Book 4, Essay 1. On the Behestan rock, which contains the principal events in the reign of Darius Hystaspes, king of Persia, about 516 BC, the mention of the Sakai or Sakai occurs thus. This is Sarokos, the Sakan. Says Darius the king, I went to the country of the Sakai, the Tigris, towards the sea. Him I passed over. I slew the enemy I seized to me, and Sarokos by name, him I seized. Rawlinson's Behestan, pages 264 and 259. In page 294 of the same work is a cuneiform inscription of a tablet of Darius at Alwand, near the town of Hamadan. By the grace of Ormuzd, these are the countries which I have gained beside Persia. I have established my power over them. They have brought tribute to me. That which has been said to them by me, that they have done. That which has been given to them by me, that they have possessed. Media, Susiana, Parthia, Aria, Bactria, Sogdiana, Chorasmia, Zarangia, Arakotia, Satagidia, Gandhara, India, the Sakai of Eurodas, the Sakai of the valley of the Tigris, Babylonia, Assyria, Arabia, Egypt, Armenia, Cappadocia, Sparta, Ionia, the Ionians of the Tyrians of the Bidians, the Scythians beyond the sea, namely the Scodri, Ionians, the Tyrians, the Bidians, the Corsians, the Sauromatai, and the Greeks. This inscription is important as it shows the existence of two branches of the Sakai, one representing the house of Isaac of the 10 tribes or Assyrian captivity, who afterwards migrated westwards, the other of the remnants of the Jewish Babylonian captivity, who did not return at the end of the 70 years, but being persecuted, migrated eastwards to Afghanistan and probably to India also. The Persians call all the Scythians Sakai, Herodotus, book 6, 7. The Sakai got possession of the most fertile tract of Armenia, which was called after their own name, Sakasena, Strabo. Herodotus states that the Scythians say that theirs is the most recent of all nations. They reckon the whole number of years from their first beginning, the king of Targetus, to the time that Darius crossed over against them, to be not more than 1,000 years, but just that number. Now Darius' expedition against the Scythians was about 500 BC, and 1,000 years before that brings us to the time of Moses, our Scythian ancestors, Colonel Goller, page 5. Strabo, book 1, 2, 27, informs us that the ancient Greeks classed all the northern nations with which they were familiar under one name of Scythians, or, according to Homer, nomads. Pliny says that the Sakai were among the most distinguished people of Scythia. Strabo says, and the sheep-feeding Sakai, a people of Scythian race, but they inhabited wheat-producing Asia. Truly, they were a colony of the nomads, a righteous race. Strabo says, the Sakai or Sakai were an important branch of the Scythian nation. The above-named tribes, known as Sakai by the Aryans and Cymri by the Semitic tribes, are no other than the remnants of the 10 tribes of Israel who settled Britain. Sharon Turner, in his History of the Anglo-Saxon, declares that they were a German or Teutonic, that is, a Gothic or Scythian tribe. See page 34, book 1, volume 1 History. And of course, various Scythian nations which have been recorded, the Sakai or Sakai, are the people of whom the descent of the Saxons may be inferred with the least violation of probability. They seized Bactriana and the most fertile parts of Armenia, which from them derived the name of Sakasena. That some of the divisions of this people were really called Sakasuna, or sons of the Sakai, is obvious from Pliny, from he says that the Sakai who settled in Armenia were named Sakasani. Pliny, and the name Sakasena, which they gave to the part of Armenia they occupied, is nearly the same sound as Saxonia. The author of the Lost 10 Tribes and the Saxons of the East says, there is indication that the Sakai, if they took not their names from the house of Isaac, were at least connected with Isaac's descendants. Dr. Moore again, in Ancient Pillar Stones of Scotland, speaking of the Sakai, says, we have reasons to believe a tribe of the same people, denominated Ari by Tacitus, also conveyed the name into German through Thrace, which was called Aria, according to Stephanus. Herodotus says that the Medians were Ari, and we can well suppose that the Sakai might adopt and be known as the same name. That the people were called Aryans, were Hebrews, is, however, evident from the names of their cities. This early record sufficiently connects the Aryans with the Israelites, and indicates also a possible origin of the name Sakai, as applied to a people who certainly occupied the same region and were so numerous that the Persians called the place after them Sakai. If, then, they were Israelites, we see at once how they came to be called Sakai or Sakai, for we know that they were called Beth Isaac in their own country shortly before captivity. Amos, now, therefore, hear thou the word of the Lord. Thou sayest, prophesy not against Israel, and drop not thy word against the house of Isaac. Turn also to Genesis, which is repeated in Romans and Hebrews. The promise to Abram was that, in Isaac shall thy seed be called. The Israelites were never called after Isaac prior to the captivity, but Amos first mentions them after the house of Isaac a few years before their captivity. Notice, too, that in the right, that is the Oriental pronunciation of the word Isaac, the emphasis is on the last syllable and not on the first. Isaac. 27,280 men placed in a remote part of Assyria were not likely to remain long without making an effort to regain their liberty. Hence, it is extremely probable that soon after the removal into captivity they began to escape and, travelling westwards, were known historically as Sakas, Sakai, Saxon, Cymri, Gimri. The Reverend M. Salomon, himself a Jew, in his work Researches in the East, an important account of the 10 tribes, pages 20 and 21, states that many of the people did not go into captivity, but evaded the calamity, going off with their flocks and turning nomads, and that the chief or prince whom they appointed could muster 120,000 horse and 100,000 foot. The above will explain why it is that the British, alias the Israelites, passing through an Aryan country and historically and commercially associated with an Aryan people, have been mistaken for Aryan, though they themselves were in reality Shemitic, having been sifted as corn is sifted in a sieve. Amos. The Celts, Druids, etc. After leaving their primeval home in Central Asia, the Celts had become known to classical writers by the several names Keltoi, Galatoi, and Galai. The original character of Druidism was essentially Oriental and corresponded in many important particulars with the simple and spiritual character of the Persian theosophy, teaching the purity of the Godhead as a metaphysical abstraction and the eternity of the soul's existence by transmigration. But side by side with Oriental theism appeared in process of time an element worship, which identified the objects of nature with the memory of deceased heroes, and worshipped the sun and stars, thunder and the storm, and the visible representations of superior beings. Hence the Roman commander Caesar Bel Gal thought he could discern a likeness between the objects of Celtic worship and the host of Olympus. Thus in Tentates he recognized Mercurius and Belenus. He saw a likeness to Apollo. He identified Tyrannus with the thundering Jupiter, while the god who he calls Mars was probably Isus or Hesus. Speaking of the priestly body, the powerful order of the Druids, the Reverend G. F. McClear says, at its head and supreme all over the grades into which it was divided was a high priest, whose dignity lasted for life and whose election was sometimes decided by wager of battle. The Druids were at once the ministers of a theocracy and the judges of legislators of the people. They enjoyed an immunity from service in the army and from the obligation to pay taxes. The Reverend A. Hislop, in his Two Babylons, identifies Mercury with the Babylonian deity Nebo, Apollo with Egyptian Horus, an incarnation of Osiris, while the Babylonian god Yav is recognized by Layard as original of Jupiter. It is interesting to compare the priestly class among the ancient Britons with those of the Hebrews. We find 1. That each had a head or high priest who exercised supreme authority over the whole body. 2. Each were not only ministers of divine worship and sacrifices, but also exercised judicial functions. If there arise a matter too hard for thee in judgment, between blood and blood, between plea and plea, and between stroke and stroke, being matters of controversy within thy gates, and thou shalt come unto thy priests, the Levites, and inquire, and they shall show thee sentence of judgment, and the man that will do presumptuously will not hearken unto the priest, or unto the judge, even that man shall die. Deuteronomy. 3. Both were exempted from payment of taxes. Also we certify that you that touch on any of the priests and Levites, it shall not be lawful to impose toll, tribute, or custom upon them. Ezra. Most likely, much of the false religion was introduced by the Phoenician or Carthaginian settlers, yet there are many circumstances connected with Judaism which led to the belief that originally it was part of patriarchal origin, though perverted and depraved by the superstitions introduced in latter days. Even the superstitions reverence for the oak, though a perversion, appears to have had some connection with that feeling which led Abraham to erect his tent and his family altar beneath the shade of a spreading tree at Mamre and elsewhere. The circles of stones already mentioned as Druidical places of worship appear similar in some respects to the altars and pillars built by Moses under Mount Sinai before the constructing of the tabernacle, Exodus. They have a strong resemblance to the piles of great stones at Gilgal and Mount Ebal and those erected by Jacob. Druidism, when divested of its later evil practices, has been described rather as a corruption of the patriarchal religion than a direct opposition thereto, like the heathen rites of Greek and Rome. One of the ancient writers who lived at this very time describes the Britons as free from much of the craft and wickedness exhibited by the inhabitants of other lands, yet their principles and practices were vastly inferior to those of the Jewish nation. We shall find that, in proportion as the truths of the Bible have prevailed in this country in greater or less purity, so the worth and prosperity of the people have increased or diminished. Britons and Saxons, Religious Tract Society, pages 12 and 14. Danes, Normans, Jutes and Frisians. Thierry, in his History of the Norman Conquest, Book 1, pages 56, tells us, such was the first appearance in England of the northern pirates called Danes or Normans, according as they came from the islands of the Baltic Sea or from the coast of Norway. They were descended from the same primitive race from the Anglo-Saxons. After the conquest of Palestine by Joshua, at the end of the 40 years' wanderings in the wilderness, the land was divided amongst the Israelites by lot. The sea coast of Ashkelon and Joppa was Dan's share. Finding, however, that they had not sufficient land, 600 Danites proceeded north and conquering Laish or Leshem, a city situated to the east of Tyre, changed its name to Dan after the name of Dan their father, Joshua. Judges 29. In Judges, volume 17, an allusion is made to Dan remaining in ships instead of assisting their brethren in the struggles against Jabin, king of Canaan, and Sisera, his captain. In Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre, Dan also and Javan were stated to be going to and fro, occupied in thy Tyre's fairs. Thus we notice that the tribe of Dan took to the sea at an early stage of her history, after the settlement in Palestine. Nautical enterprises led her to wander away from Palestine, brought her in contact with Greece and Tyre, led her to engage in commercial pursuits and establish colonies, was at the same time she endeavoured to retain her tribal distinction by calling places after the name of the patriarch Dan. That Javan is Greece is evident from Josephus and from Daniel and Zechariah, where Javan is translated Greece. Grecian history continually refers to the Danai, Danas or Danoni, associating or connecting them with the Phoenicians, a maritime tribe on the borders of Tyre and Sidon in the north of Palestine. Hence, whenever we read of the Phoenicians, we find that the Danai leave their mark whereby we can track them through Europe. Thus Caledon in Greece, Caledonia in Scotland, the Don, the Danube, Denmark, Doncaster, Dundee, Donegal, Dundalk, Danslow, Donaghadee, etc. Historical research has connected the Danai of the Greeks with the Israelitish tribe of Dan. Strabo says, Danas, having arrived in Argos, made a law that those who had been born in the name of Pelasgiotai throughout Greece should be called Danai. J. P. Yeatman, in his Early English History, pages 116 to 120, says, the Britons themselves claimed to be the descendants of the ancient Trojans. The religion of the Britons was identical with that held by all the disciples of the Pelagians. The identity of the British Druids with the Hyperboreans of the Greeks is clear and distinct. Arius, king of the Lacedaemonians, to Onias sendeth greeting. We have met with a certain writings whereby we have discovered that both the Jews and the Lacedaemonians are one of stock and derived from the kindred of Abraham. It is but just therefore that you are our brethren should send us to about any of your concerns as you please. We will also do the same thing and esteem your concerns as our own, and will look upon our concerns as in common with yours. Demoteles, who brings you this letter will bring you your answer back to us. This letter is 4 square, and the seal is an eagle with a dragon in his claws. Josephus, Antique. 10. This is the answer which the Jews, sometime after, sent back to Sparta. Jonathan, the high priest, Onias being dead, of the Jewish nation, and the senate, and body of the people of Jews, to the Ephori and senate, and body of the people of the Lacedaemonians, send greetings. We both joyfully receive the epistle, and we were well pleased with the Demoteles and Arias, although we did not need such a demonstration, because we were well satisfied about it from the sacred writings. Yet did not we think fit first to begin the claim of this relation to you, lest we should seem too early in taking to ourselves the glory which is now given us by you. Ibid, Volume 8, see also Maccabeans. The letter sent by Arius to Onias, the high priest, at Jerusalem about 180 BC is said to have been sealed with the impress of an eagle with a dragon in his claws. Now Jacob said, Dan shall be a serpent in the way, an adder in the path. Ancient Hebrew and Chaldee authorities say that Dan bore on his standard a crowned serpent or basilisk held in the claws of an eagle. It is worthy of note, says Colonel Gawler, that Danius, who is recorded as landing in Greece from Egypt, was said to be the son of Belus, sometimes spelt Bella, which strongly resembles Bilhah, the name of Jacob's concubine and mother of Dan. I think, says Latham, Ethnology of Europe, page 157, that the eponymous of the Argive Dani was no other than that of the Israelite tribe of Dan. Only we are used to confine ourselves to the soil of Palestine in our consideration of the Israelites, that we treat them as if they were adscripti glebo, and ignoring the share they may have taken in the ordinary history of the world. The seaports between Tyre and Ascalon of Dan, Ephraim and Asher must have followed the history of seaports in general, and not have stood on the coast for nothing. Angles, Saxons, Frisians and Jutes were all tribes of one common stock, all spoke varieties of one common tongue. Engel in native speech is the name of the whole nation, of which the Sakai are a part. 7 kingdoms stand out in a marked way, 7 kingdoms of which is possible to put together something like a continuous history, 7 kingdoms which alone supply candidates from the dominion of the whole island. Freeman's Northern Quest of England. In short, the researches of modern historians unequivocally favour the opinion that under the names of Celtae, Galatai, Gauls, Guidals, Celts, Cimmeri, Cymri, Brython, Lagreans, Scots and Picts, only one race, under different tribe or clan divisions, political organisations and periods of existence is spoken of, and while different degrees of diversity throughout shorter and longer periods of estrangement and foreign admixture had intervened, still no much diversity prevailed as would materially affect the unity and integrity, and hence their classification as one people. Nicholas, British Ethnology. The summary of evidence from history. Thus we find the British nation, though made up of various elements, are in reality one race. They are generally considered to be composed of 2 great factors, viz. the Cymric and the Sakai or Saxon. The Cymric consists of the Celtic, Gaelic and Cornish bodies, while those of the Saxons embrace the Angles, Danes, Normans, Jutes, Frisians, etc. Both the Sakai and the Cymri have been traced historically to the 7th century BC to ancient Media on the banks of the Araxes and along the southern shores of the Caspian Sea. The very locality where the 10 tribes of Israel were placed after their captivity by the Assyrians, Chronicles verse 26, 2 Kings, Cymri or Gimri were, we understand, as Herodotus informs us, to be the Semitic equivalent of the Aryan name of Saka. In other words, that the Assyrians knew the people of the country where the children of Israel were captive as Cymri, Cymri, Gimri, while the Persians knew them as Sakai, the Greeks as Sakai, and the Romans as Sakoi. Strabo clearly informs us that the ancient Greeks classed all the northern nations from which they were familiar under the one name of Scythians, or according to Homer, nomads. Strabo. But with Herodotus and Pliny, distinguishes the Sakai as an important branch of them. The term Scythian, it should be borne in mind, is an appellation distinctive of habit rather than of race. Hence the same people are called nomads or wanderers by Homer, instead of Scythians or dwellers in tents, which accounts for the use of the term historically in speaking of nomadic tribes existing prior to the captivity of the 10 tribes. Reduced, then, to its simplest logical form, the historical argument stands thus. 1. The several component elements of the British are descended from the same primitive stocks as the Kimrai and the Sakai, who have been traced back historically to the 7th century BC to the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, and who consequently travel westwards in their migrations from the east. 2. The 10 tribes of Israel were taken captive in the 8th century BC and placed on the southern shores of the Caspian Sea, where they remained for a short time until about the 7th century BC they migrated westwards, a great way to Asareth. They were designated Scuths in Herodotus and Beth Cumrae in the cuneiform inscriptions of Taglath-Palessa, the same word viz. Cumrae also being discovered on the Nimrod obelisk referring to Jehu of the house of Omri, a king of 10-tribed Israel. 3. Therefore, there is every reason to believe that the British must be descended from 10-tribed Israel. Okay, people, that was a nice quick chapter. I like these to the point and a summary at the end. I like that because it just reminds you what we've just read. Because sometimes it's hard, like a lot of biblical writing is hard to read, so it's easy to listen to. If you know what I mean, it's strange. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you in chapter 2. Thank you, brethren.